Why South Sudan? An Every Village podcast where we answer questions about the world's youngest nation. The question of the day is, what are some of the basic facts about South Sudan? Hey everyone, this is the host, Tiana Johnston, live in studio with one of our favorite interviewees, I guess. I don't know. Andrew Brown.
Hey, Tiana. I like how you gave your title The Host. It's an upgrade.
Oh, I feel like it's been a minute since I've actually had you back on the air. So
it has felt like a while for sure. So
it has.
It's good to be back.
Yes. All right. So I thought, we've had several really good podcasts going out, but I thought, you know what better always just to go back to the basic facts about South Sudan. And I feel like you're just very talented at it. But even just like the facts, not just every village, but of South Sudan specifically. So I thought we would dive in.
Yeah, well, there's so many directions you can go. There's amazing facts that are amazing because they're just astoundingly devastating. And then there's just amazing facts that are, oh man, who could have known, and so forth. So we do love talking about South Sudan and its uniqueness. You got to start with the fact that it is still the world's youngest nation. Mm-hmm. And we're about to enter the 14th year. So, but we're into our teenage years as a country, but, seceded from Sudan in 2011. And so that's an important fact. And we've talked about the history of South Sudan on this podcast a lot, but because of their years and decades of unrest and instability and war, South Sudan was never developed and then went backwards. They were just always undeveloped, which is pretty unique. Most of the African colonies were developed to some degree by the British or by the French or by the Belgians or whoever colonized them. South Sudan, although it was officially under British rule, it was really never controlled by the British fully. And so they had a few outposts, but that's it. Whereas Sudan, it was all one nation, Sudan, Anglo-Egyptian Sudan. And so they did develop Sudan, but not South Sudan. So that's a little bit unique because it is, really one of the world's least developed nations. And so I'll start there with development in general. There's a statistic called the Human Development Index that the UN studies and recommends, and it quantifies a bunch of different varying factors. There's access to education and health and other features that all combine into this statistic. And so, earlier this year, South Sudan was ranked as the world's least developed nation in the world. Now, I with some of these stats and facts, I wanted to make sure that I was up to date. And so I pulled it up just now before we got on. And somehow South Sudan is not the lowest anymore, but not because they've improved. Somalia dropped 1/100% below South Sudan. So wow. There you go. Somalia and South Sudan basically neck and neck.
Wow.
For something that you don't want to be neck and neck. For. And so it's just really sad. So many stats that go into the Human Development Index. We've talked about access to education. South Sudan has one of the lowest literacy rates in the world. Only about a quarter of the population can read or write at a functional reading level. And you see that. And it really goes beyond just functional literacy as well, Tiana, because many of our staff, because of the history of South Sudan, didn't get education at an age-appropriate level. So some of them, graduated high school when they were in their 20s, right? Well, when you start education that late, it puts you behind, and for many, many years, it's hard to ever fully catch up because we're so moldable when we're young. Our brains are so sharp and, sponges. But if you miss that time period, it's just hard. Mm-hmm. And so even with our staff that have an education, some high school degrees or even college degrees, it in many ways their exposure to basic educational concepts was behind to start, and it's just a challenge to catch up. So these are such intelligent people, but their access to education still has a long-term impact. Their access to technology is so far behind, and so using computers and all these things. You compare them to nations nearby, and it's just not the same level typically. And so those are all factors of the history of the nation. We talk about the health risk factors that exist in South Sudan that feed into that Human Development Index. And there's just some harrowing statistics. You think about access to water is one that, of course, we're passionate about. And so, you'll typically read about 50% of the population has access to improved water sources, but then it's really not even consistent access, because so many of these improved water sources, i.e. water wells, hand pumps, break down so often that at any given snapshot moment in the country, it's only about a third of the population has access to water, that's really sustainable. And so it's just such a massive, massive issue in South Sudan, and with access to, or a lack of access to, safe water, that has so many implications, and we've talked about that here. Let's look at the health implications. Well, waterborne diseases rampant, malaria rampant, all these notions, and that I want to just, as we're talking about stats and facts about the nation, some of it is to provide a high level overview, but Tiana, you and I, for us, that's personal, because our staff, we get the phone calls, we read the emails, we read the text messages from our staff on a regular basis of maybe it's they who are struggling with a sickness or a disease, or maybe it's their child, or maybe it's a relative who has died, or whatever. Some of these things from very preventable stuff or very treatable stuff, other things from very difficult stuff. Some of the conditions that our staff face are so painful, and they thought, but they've lived with it for years. And the thought of having to go to work with a severe kidney disease, or with a major tumor growing in your arm, or whatever it is. I mean, we've seen these things. It's mind-blowing that they have to live through it, and there's really no answer. If they're very fortunate, and every village has set up we have basic medical benefits, which is or for treatable things in the local level, but we recognized a few years ago that wasn't enough, because our staff might have a need for surgeries, and they have no option where they are. So what do? So we have to save some money and put it away to be able to fly them to Juba, maybe the capital city, to get some diagnosis and maybe surgery there. But there's some cases that are beyond the scope of Juba's medical facilities, and so you have to fly them to Uganda or to other places. So we were able to set that up, and I'm really thankful. For the last, I'd say, probably 4 years, we've been doing this program. And every year we max out our balance, and we get medical requests from our staff. But I think about certain things like Santino Makuch and a wheel whose son was born with club feet. Well, club feet is a super treatable, very easily treatable condition in the West and in other developed nations. But in South Sudan, truly, if it weren't for every village, his son would be crippled for the rest of his life. But, thankfully, we were able to send him to get treatment, and that's a long-term treatment, because you have to do the first surgery, but then you have to do follow-up visits with braces and leg braces and all these things. But it's so awesome, because whenever I see Santino, this is probably 3 or 4 years ago now, that his son is that old, and he loves, when I get there, he loves showing me videos of his son running around and playing, just like any other kid. Yeah. And he's so thankful, because he knows, because there are kids, and Tiana, you've seen it, kids that are crawling around on the ground as 8-year-olds because they were born with club feet, and they weren't part of a family that could get treatment. So these are just such sad realities, and so then there's the statistics about childbirth, and South Sudan has one of the highest birth rates in the world in terms of the average number of deliveries a woman experiences during her life. They give birth to many, many children. I don't remember. I think the average woman is 5.5 births on average as a society, but so many women have given birth to many, many more children. And and frankly, most mothers, I would say, in South Sudan, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say most mothers, you ask how many kids they have, and they'll tell you. And that's not including all the children that they've given birth to. They've lost 1 or 2. Very, very common. And in fact, so common that, in Dinka, they have a name that they'll name a child who follows a sibling who has died, right? Yeah. And you hear those names, very common names, because it's so common. And they're replacing their older brother or sister in some ways in the eyes of God. And so, And so, you hear these stories, so many children dying in childbirth or in young ages because of preventable situations, and then the complications of pregnancy in that tough environment. Tiana, you've mentioned the podcast before, so I think I can mention it publicly, but you're expecting your first now. And so you can literally feel the weight of it and the heart behind it now, seeing women that are pregnant carrying these 40-pound jerry cans of water on their heads, walking 2-3 miles, 4 miles, getting water.
Yeah.
That's terrible for your back, for your neck. And then just all the hard work that they're doing, the cooking. When you're cooking, it's a lot of work to cook meals in the United States, but they're having to start the fire from scratch with charcoal and, collect all the food items and put it all together. I mean, it takes hours and hours to prepare meals, right? So it's so much hard work. And these pregnant women, they're bending over, they're sweeping, and they're carrying heavy things. Oftentimes they're carrying a baby on one arm and they're sweeping with the other, or doing, and you look at, the ability of women to multitask in the world, and it's amazing. And I said before that I don't think there's any people group in the world that's stronger than the South Sudanese woman. So strong.
I would agree.
and so all those, that's painting the picture of the scene to say that South Sudan has the world's highest maternal mortality rate, meaning mothers that die in childbirth. And the reason is because 99% of births are at home without any attending medical professional at all. Just the oldest woman in their community or whatever who's at home. And when we're talking about home, we're talking about mud huts without furniture. They're sitting on maybe a bamboo mat on the ground, giving birth. And you think about all the bending over and all the heavy weight and all, that. You've got so often the babies in the womb kind of flip around the umbilical cord, and that it creates complication, or you have breech, deliveries, any type of complication, and it's pretty much a death sentence to the mom.
And even multiples. I mean, there are people
Twins,
that literally have triplets. It's
there's nothing, without any medicine, without any medical equipment at all. What's going to happen, right? And it's terrible. And then those are the delivery risks, but then you also have just normal complications in pregnancy, gestational diabetes or other high blood pressure, all these things, right? That come in, bleeding, that comes, all that stuff. It is, I've never given birth, but it's a very complicated thing.
It is.
And we're grateful that God has, given women the power to do it. But, without any, just truly without any medical recourse or help, it is a very dangerous thing. And so I've said this stat before, but more women still in South Sudan die in childbirth than finish the 6th grade. And that is a terrible statistic in terms of pregnancy health, and it's a terrible statistic in terms of female education. And there's two factors going on there. There's the risk of birth, and there's also the cultural aspect of not sending girls to school, because at a young age they're needed for other chores. They're needed to go get water, or they're needed to help around the house or with younger siblings, or, sadly, underage marriage is so prevalent. So, they're being, given to another man for marriage or whatever. It's just a big problem. And when you have experienced this for generation after generation, and that's all you've ever known, and you haven't seen a different way, then it just continues to go on. And it leads to ongoing challenges. And so, those are just some of the facts. It leads to such a young nation because of the risks of childbearing, and because of the war, and because of, food insecurity, which is very regular in South Sudan. Most years, there are regions in South Sudan that are experiencing risk of starvation with food insecurity because of bad crops. It's an agrarian society. It's subsistence farming. There's really no commercial agriculture. There's no backstop. If they have a bad year, if they have too much rain or they don't have enough rain, people are going to go hungry and starve. And that is so common every year. And so it leads to such a young nation. We've talked about, if you look at the population chart based on age, 42% of the population is under the age of 14 years old. Now, at its surface, that might sound crazy and surprising, but when you dig even deeper and compare it to places like the United States, it's even more shocking. 42%, almost half the population is under 14 years old. The United States, for instance, is I think about 18%, which is a normal bell curve. South Sudan, it's a nation of babies. The median age in South Sudan is 18 years old. The United States is 38 years old. And the United States is like 69th in the world. There's 68 other countries that have older median ages, like in their 50s, populations that are much older because they are able to live longer in health and so forth. And the birth rates are lower. But in South Sudan, it's just babies and babies and babies. And so, the life expectancy in South Sudan is 56 years old. So if you reach your 50s, you're an old person. Mm-hmm. And so that has so many implications to decision making and the stability of the nation, and all that is sometimes it feels like it's a nation run by children because it kind of is, right? And so these are all pretty challenging statistics about the nation, but there's also just so much hope. It's a big nation. South Sudan is about the size of Texas, so it's a pretty big landmass. And I tell people all the time, this one's amazing. I used to say that there were 200 miles of paved road, and then this year I was wanting to update my stats, and I was expecting to have gone up a little bit, and it's actually gone down. So it was 186 miles of paved road this year, because there's no maintenance, and so roads that used to be paved, maybe they're completely defunct now. But think about that, 186 miles of paved road in a nation the size of Texas. I mean, we have golf courses that might have almost that many miles of paved road. I mean, it's ridiculous. But that leads to so much challenge getting into the country. That's why we fly in with Mission Aviation Fellowship, and they're an amazing partnering ministry. But it's just expensive to get into South Sudan. And you think about all the goods and services, it's hard to get things into South Sudan. Logistically, it's expensive. And so that's why most people don't work in South Sudan. There's so many great ministries that work around the world. There's so many great ministries that work even in neighboring countries, but they don't work in South Sudan because it's just a whole other animal. And so, that leads to challenges. But when you look at the people, here's one just such important fact, and that is the people of South Sudan are so resilient. Mm-hmm. They're just so strong. They're so willing to keep going, and there's such a hunger and a desire for them to grow, and to grow in the Lord spiritually. They're very open spiritually, to grow in capacity. They're very teachable and hungry for investment. They're a joy to work with. It's not easy, but they're a joy to work with. And so, I wouldn't have it any other way to get to do what we do. And so it's just a good reminder as we, begin another new year to reflect on, first off, our blessings, and really thank the Lord. And then also as we think about our missional involvements, to think about, societies that are just blank canvases, and they're fertile soil. It's almost like this, let me just quote Jesus on it. The fields are white for the harvest. And so let's pray for the Lord of the harvest to send out workers into the harvest field. And that is the South Sudanese themselves to their own nation. And that's what we love about every village, is that we have men and women that are dedicated every day to preaching the good news on the radio, to sharing the good news in word and in deed through their, access to water, or to discipleship with the church leaders, or with children in Awana programs, or all the different things that we get to be a part of. And they're bringing the good news. They're pushing back that darkness, and they really are building South Sudan up from the ground up. And so, I think, like so many things in life, our greatest challenges become our greatest opportunities. And that's why I feel called to this work. I think, Tiana, that's why you feel called to this work. When you go to South Sudan, you just fall in love with it, because you see how hard it is, and yet you see how fruitful it is. And, you see how amazing the people are, and it's just a joy. So,
mm-hmm. Oh, I love that we dove into this today, because actually, oh man, I'm like, the Lord couldn't have set this up any better. Because the next episode, we're actually going to be hearing from Archangelo Adup in Tanj, South Sudan, as he shares about his faith and just his life and what he's walked through. And as you said, you know, sharing the stats, I think it's really easy to be discouraged or just like, man, that's awful, that's horrible, you know. But what we hear is that, you know, these people that we care about, they're more than stats. Like they're people, they're people that God loves so, so much, and that he's moving in their hearts and he's doing amazing things. And so I'm really excited for everyone to hear that next one. So
yeah, and it's going to be powerful. I mean, Archangelo is a man who has just grown so much in the Lord, and there's beautiful aspects of his story, and there's really, really hard parts of his story, and that's the life of a South Sudanese. So I can't wait to hear it myself.
Yeah. Oh, so good. Well, thanks so much for sharing today. You always do an excellent job and very concise. So we invite everyone back to the next episode. I promise it is going to be one you might want to listen to multiple times. As we answer or ask the question to Archangelo Dupe, how has your faith grown since working with Every Village? Take care.